Hello and welcome back to Terrifying Tales and Haunted Locations. Today we have a terrifying tale that takes place in the heart of the Australian outback, where the scorching sun conceals a sinister secret. In the vast and desolate landscapes of the Australian outback, where sunsets paint the sky in shades of red, casting long shadows across the barren terrain, a tale unfolds, one shrouded in mystery and marked by a grim distinction. It recounts the chilling tale of the first woman in Australian history sentenced to life without parole for murder, revealing the horrific events behind her dark story. In the small town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, Australia, John Price, a quiet and diligent man, lived a seemingly ordinary life until he crossed paths with the enigmatic Katherine Knight. John, born on April 4, 1955, was the father of 3 children when Katherine initiated an affair with him. Widely regarded as a terrific bloke by those who knew him, his marriage had concluded in 1988. Following the divorce, his 2 older children resided with him, while his 2-year-old daughter remained with his former wife. In 1995, despite being aware of Katherine's violent reputation, she moved into John's house. Despite John's children's initial concerns, they soon grew fond of Katherine. John was thriving in his job at the local mines, and aside from occasional disputes, life seemed idyllic. In 1998, Katherine and John clashed due to his refusal to marry her. In response, she recorded a video alleging that he had stolen outdated medical kits from his work and sent them directly to his boss. The kits, however, were scavenged from the company's discarded waste. As a consequence, John lost his job he had held for 17 years. On the same day, John evicted Katherine, and she returned to her own home with news of her actions spreading throughout the town. A few months later, John and Katherine resumed their relationship, but he resisted her attempts to move in with him. The conflicts escalated, leading to strained relationships with most of his friends, who distanced themselves while the couple stayed together. Katherine, born October 24, 1955, was known for her intense stare and unsettling demeanor. The whispers of the town spoke of her troubled past and a string of failed relationships that left a trail of heartache. Raised in an unconventional and dysfunctional family, Katherine claims that she was frequently molested by several members of her family, though not her father, which continued until she was age 11. Katherine's closest bond, aside from her twin sister, was her uncle, Oscar Knight. She was devastated when he committed suicide in 1969. To this day, she insists that his ghost continues to visit her. During her time at Muswellbrook High School, Katherine adopted a solitary demeanor, and her peers recall her as a bully who intimidated smaller children. She assaulted at least one boy at school with a weapon and was once injured by a teacher who subsequently found to have acted in self-defense. However, when not in a fit of rage, Katherine displayed model student behavior, frequently earning awards for her commendable conduct. Katherine had dropped out of school by the age of 15 without acquiring literacy skills. She secured a position as a cutter in a clothing factory. A year later, she left to start on what she described as her dream job, cutting up the internal organs of butchered animals at the local slaughterhouse. Swiftly climbing the ranks, she transitioned to boning, which involved breaking a carcass into parts and then removing the flesh from the bones, and was entrusted with her own set of butcher knives. At home, she hung the knives over her bed, explaining that it ensured they were always handy if needed. John's life took a fateful turn when Katherine's simmering rage erupted into a chilling act of violence. In February 2000, a series of assaults on John reached a climax when Katherine stabbed him in the chest. Frustrated and at wit's end, he kicked her out of his house. On February 28th, he made a stop at the Scones Magistrates Court on his way to work, securing a restraining order to keep her away from both himself and his children. That very afternoon, John confided in his co-workers, expressing his fear that if he didn't show up for work the next day, it meant Katherine had murdered him. Despite their advice to avoid returning home, he insisted, driven by the concern that Katherine might harm his children. Upon arriving home, he discovered that although Katherine wasn't present, she had sent his children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. John then spent the evening with his neighbors before returning home and going to bed at 11 p.m. Later, Katherine arrived at John's house while he was sleeping. She sat and watched television for a few minutes before taking a shower. Then she woke John and they had intercourse, after which he fell asleep. At 6 a.m. the following day, a neighbor grew concerned upon seeing John's car still in his driveway. When he failed to show up for work, his employer sent a worker to investigate. Both the neighbor and the worker attempted to wake him by knocking on the bedroom window. However, they became alarmed when they noticed blood on the front door and decided to contact the police. Breaking down the door, the police discovered John's lifeless body, while Katherine was in a comatose state from ingesting a large quantity of pills. It was then discovered that Katherine had stabbed John with a butcher's knife while he was asleep. Blood evidence indicated that John had woken up, tried to turn on the light, and attempted to flee, while Katherine pursued him throughout the house. Although he had managed to open the front door and step outside, he either stumbled back inside or was forcibly dragged back into the hallway, where he eventually succumbed to his fatal bleeding. Later, Katherine went to Aberdeen and withdrew $1,000 from John's ATM account. John's autopsy showed that he had sustained at least 37 stab wounds distributed across the front and back of his body, with several penetrating vital organs. The grim details of Katherine's sickening rampage eventually came to light. Several hours after John had died, Katherine had skinned him and hung the skin on the main beam of the entrance to the lounge of his house. She then decapitated John and cooked parts of his body, making a stew with baked potatoes, vegetables, and gravy, and divided it into 2 separate place settings. Next to each plate, there was a note with the name of one of John's 2 adult children on it. The intention was to serve the meals to each of his children. A third meal was thrown on the back lawn for unknown reasons. John's head was found in a pot with vegetables, which was still warm, estimated to be around 104 to 122 degrees Fahrenheit, indicating the cooking had taken place in the early morning. As investigators began uncovering Katherine's troubling history, a disconcerting pattern came to light. Accounts of her obsession, violent tendencies, and morbid fascination with knives revealed a woman with an extensive and disturbing history of madness. The courtroom became a stage for the macabre as Katherine faced justice for her heinous crimes. The details that emerged during the trial sent shivers down the spines of even the most seasoned legal professionals. Katherine's initial proposal to plead guilty to manslaughter was declined. Subsequently, on March 2, 2001, she was formally charged with the murder of John Price, to which she pleaded not guilty. When the trial commenced, Judge Barry O'Keefe provided the 60 jury prospects with the option to be excused due to the nature of the graphic evidence, and 5 chose to be excused. Upon reading out the witness list, several more prospects withdrew, and the final jury was impaneled. Subsequently, Katherine's attorney spoke to the judge, leading to an adjournment until the following day. The next morning, Katherine changed her plea to guilty, resulting in the dismissal of the jury. It was then revealed that Justice O'Keefe had been informed of the plea change the day before. He then adjourned the trial and ordered an overnight psychiatric assessment to determine if Katherine comprehended the consequences of a guilty plea and was mentally fit to make such a plea. Katherine's legal team had initially planned to defend her by asserting amnesia and disassociation, a claim supported by most psychiatrists, although they did acknowledge her sanity. Ultimately, 2 psychiatrists concluded that Katherine suffered from borderline personality disorder. No explanation has ever been provided for Katherine's guilty plea, and even after entering it, she continued to reject responsibility for her actions. During the sentencing hearing, Katherine's lawyers sought her exemption to shield her from certain details, but the request was denied. When Timothy Lyons took the stand and described the skinning and decapitation, Knight became hysterical and had to be sedated. On November 8th, Justice O'Keefe emphasized the nature of the crime, and Katherine's lack of remorse warranted a severe penalty. Consequently, he sentenced her to life imprisonment, declined to set a non-parole period, and mandated that her papers be marked, "Definitely never to be released." For the first time, such a sentence had been imposed on a woman in Australian history. In June 2006, Knight appealed the life sentence, arguing that a penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole was excessively harsh for the crime. In September, the court dismissed the appeal in the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal. Justice McKellen wrote in his judgment, "This was an appalling crime, almost beyond contemplation in a civilized society." The Australian outback, once a place of serene isolation, now carries the legacy of John Price's tragic end. Sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the ones that play out in the quietest of places. Until next time, thanks for watching.